Standing in my childhood kitchen, I stared at the bank statement showing my life savings had vanished. Mom's voice echoed, "We spent 95% of your savings to buy your sister's house." 28 years old, I had trusted them with my financial power of attorney during my overseas deployment. Now I was broke while my golden child sister owned a mansion. But as I dug deeper into the paperwork scattered across the table, I discovered something that would shatter everything I believed about my family forever. Hey everyone! Before we dive into this insane family betrayal story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you're ready for some serious family drama with the most shocking twist you'll never see coming, smash that like button and hit subscribe, because this story about family revenge and justice will leave you speechless. Trust me, you'll want to stick around until the end for the most satisfying payback moment ever. My name is Dakota, and 3 months earlier I had returned from my second deployment in Afghanistan, feeling proud of my service and excited about my future. The military had taught me discipline strategy, and most importantly, how to save money. Over 6 years of service, I had managed to save nearly $200,000. Every penny was earmarked for my dream of opening a veterinary clinic specializing in therapy animals for veterans with PTSD. The savings account was jointly held with my parents, something I had set up when I was 19 and naive about family loyalty. Dad had convinced me it was smart financial planning, and Mom had tearfully explained how much easier it would make things if something happened to me overseas. Like an idiot, I had believed their concern was genuine. My sister Brittany had always been the favorite. While I was getting my hands dirty volunteering at animal shelters and studying for my veterinary entrance exams, she was getting her third DUI and dropping out of her second college program. When I enlisted to pay for my education, she was getting a brand new BMW for her 21st birthday. The pattern was clear, but I had convinced myself that family meant unconditional love and support. The day I came home, Brittany was already living in a gorgeous 4-bedroom colonial in the most expensive neighborhood in town. She gave me a tour like she was showing off a prize, giggling about her walk-in closets and granite countertops. When I asked how she could afford such a place on her part-time retail job, she just shrugged and said Mom and Dad had helped with the down payment. Something felt wrong immediately. My parents had always claimed they were living paycheck to paycheck, constantly asking me to send money home for various emergencies. Dad's back surgery. Mom's car repairs, unexpected medical bills that never seemed to end. I had sent thousands over the years, never questioning their need because I trusted them completely. The first red flag appeared when I tried to access my savings account online. The password had been changed. When I called the bank, they informed me that significant withdrawals had been made over the past 18 months. But since the account was joint, they could not provide details without proper verification in person. That morning in the kitchen, surrounded by bank statements, I had demanded to see the ugly truth unfolded like a nightmare. $185,000 had been withdrawn in 6 separate transactions, each one corresponding exactly with dates I could now remember calling home and hearing about Brittany's house hunting progress. Mom sat across from me, her hands folded like she was at a church social instead of explaining how she had stolen my life savings. "Brittany needed help getting started in life," she said calmly, as if that justified everything. "You're young and strong. You can earn more money. But she struggled so much, and we just wanted to give her stability." Dad nodded along like a bobblehead, adding, "Besides, family takes care of family. You would have spent that money eventually anyway." The casual way they dismissed my dreams, my sacrifices, my years of careful planning made my blood boil. But I kept my voice level, using every ounce of military discipline to stay controlled. "So you stole from me to buy Brittany a house she cannot afford to maintain, and you think that is acceptable?" "We did not steal," Mom snapped, her fake sweetness finally cracking. "Your name was on the account. It was family money. Family money that I earned and saved while getting shot at in a war zone." Brittany chose that moment to waltz into the kitchen, coffee cup in hand, acting like this was all perfectly normal. "Oh, good you told her," she said brightly. "I was wondering when you were going to break the news. Thanks again for helping out, sis. The house is amazing." Her complete lack of shame or gratitude was the final straw. "Help Brittany. They stole my entire life savings. I had no idea this was happening." She rolled her eyes dramatically. "Come on, Dakota. Do not be so dramatic. It is not like you were doing anything important with that money anyway. You are always talking about helping people and animals and whatever. This way you are helping family first, which is what really matters." The twisted logic was stunning. In their minds, my money had never really belonged to me. It was some kind of family resource that they could distribute as they saw fit. And I was selfish for wanting to use my own savings for my own dreams. But as I sat there listening to their justifications, a memory surfaced that made everything even worse. 6 months earlier, I had called home excited about a potential partnership opportunity with an established vet clinic. The owner was retiring and wanted to sell to someone who shared his vision for animal-assisted therapy. I had told my parents about the timeline, the financing I would need, and how perfect the opportunity was for my goals. Mom had been so supportive on that call, asking detailed questions about my business plan and telling me how proud she was of my ambition. Now I realized she had been gathering intelligence, figuring out exactly how much money I would need and when I would need it, so she could steal it before I had the chance to use it. The betrayal was not just financial, it was calculated and deliberate. They had not just taken my money, they had sabotaged my future while pretending to care about my dreams. Every supportive conversation, every proud moment they had shared with me, had been a lie designed to keep me compliant, while they systematically robbed me blind. As I stared at the bank statements, my mind was already shifting into strategic mode. The military had taught me that when faced with an enemy, you gather intelligence, assess their weaknesses, and plan your counterattack. My family had just declared war on my future, and they clearly thought I would just accept their betrayal and move on. They had no idea who they were dealing with. 6 years in the Army had taught me patience, planning, and persistence. I was not the naive 19-year-old who had trusted them with financial power of attorney. I was a combat veteran who knew how to fight dirty when necessary. And I was about to show them exactly what happened when you betrayed someone who had learned warfare from the best. The game was on, and they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. That night, I sat in my childhood bedroom, feeling like a stranger in my own life. The pink walls and high school trophies belonged to someone else, someone who had believed that family meant loyalty and love. The person staring back at me from the mirror was harder, colder, and absolutely furious. But anger without strategy was useless, and the military had taught me never to react emotionally. Instead, I pulled out my laptop and began what I called Operation Family Truth. If they wanted to play dirty, I would show them what a real tactical assault looked like. First, I needed to understand the full scope of their deception. I started by requesting copies of all bank statements, transaction records, and any documentation related to my account going back 3 years. The bank was surprisingly helpful once I explained that I suspected financial elder abuse. Apparently, adult children stealing from elderly parents was common, but parents stealing from their adult children was noteworthy enough to get their attention. While I waited for the paperwork, I did some reconnaissance on Brittany's new house. Public records showed she had purchased the property for $350,000 with a down payment of exactly $185,000. My money had not just helped with the down payment, it was the entire down payment. Without my savings, she would never have qualified for the mortgage on her retail salary. But the deeper I dug, the more interesting things became. Property tax records showed the house was assessed at $420,000, meaning Brittany had gotten an incredible deal. The seller was listed as Meridian Properties LLC, which meant nothing to me initially. However, a quick internet search revealed that Meridian Properties was owned by my Uncle Frank Dad's younger brother. Uncle Frank had always been the family success story, the one who had built a real estate empire, while Dad struggled with various failed business ventures. I remembered him coming to family dinners and offering Dad investment opportunities that never seemed to work out. Now I was starting to understand why. I called Frank's office and pretended to be a potential investor interested in Meridian Properties. His secretary was surprisingly chatty, mentioning that Mr. Frank had recently sold a property to his niece at well below market value as a family favor. She also mentioned that he had been helping his brother with some financial planning lately. The pieces were starting to come together, and the picture was uglier than I had imagined. This was not just my parents making a desperate decision to help Brittany. This was a coordinated family conspiracy involving multiple relatives, and I had been specifically targeted. Next, I started examining my parents' financial situation more closely. For years, they had claimed to be struggling, constantly asking me for money for various emergencies. But if they had been able to access and spend $185,000 without any legal consequences, they obviously had more control over their finances than they had led me to believe. I drove to the courthouse and pulled public records on their property, their debts, and any recent financial transactions. What I found was infuriating. 2 years earlier, they had refinanced their house and taken out a substantial amount of cash. 6 months after that, they had purchased a new car outright. Their mortgage payments were current, their credit cards were paid off, and they had been living quite comfortably while crying poverty to me. The emergency money I had been sending home had not gone to medical bills or car repairs. It had gone straight into their pockets while they saved my larger savings account for Brittany's house fund. Every guilt trip, every tearful phone call about unexpected expenses, every time they had made me feel selfish for wanting to save money instead of helping family, had been a calculated lie. But the most damaging discovery came when I found the power of attorney documents I had signed years earlier. Hidden in the legal language was a clause I had never noticed, probably because I had been too young and trusting to read carefully. The power of attorney was not limited to emergency situations. It gave them broad authority to make financial decisions on my behalf for any reason they deemed beneficial to the family unit. My lawyer later explained that the document was unusually broad and would probably not hold up in court, especially since I had been misled about its scope. But it showed that this had been planned for years. They had been setting up the legal framework to steal from me long before I ever deployed overseas. The betrayal was so complete, so thoroughly planned, that I actually had to admire their strategy. They had identified me as the family cash cow early on, set up the legal mechanisms to access my money, spent years conditioning me to send them emergency funds without question, and then systematically emptied my savings account while I was serving my country overseas. It was brilliant in its thoroughness and absolutely evil in its execution. As I sat surrounded by bank statements, property records, and legal documents, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt and confusion were being replaced by something colder and more focused. They had played a long game against me, using my love and trust as weapons. Now it was my turn to play, and I had advantages they did not know about. 6 years in the military had connected me with people in finance, law enforcement, and investigations. I had favors I could call and connections they could not imagine, and skills they had no idea I possessed. More importantly, I had learned that the best revenge was not emotional payback, but systematic destruction of your enemy's position. They thought I would just accept this and move on because I was family-oriented and forgiving. They thought I would prioritize keeping the peace over seeking justice. They thought I was still that naive 19-year-old who had trusted them with everything. They were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. I was going to take apart their little conspiracy piece by piece, expose every lie they had told, and make sure they faced consequences for every dollar they had stolen. But I was going to do it legally, systematically, and with maximum damage to their reputation and their relationships. The war had officially begun, and they had no idea what was coming for them. The next morning, I drove to the law offices of Martinez and Associates, a firm that specialized in financial fraud and family law. My friend Jessica from my unit had recommended them after her own family had tried to steal her military benefits during a messy divorce. The receptionist led me to a conference room where I met Sarah Martinez, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who listened to my story with the intensity of a hawk watching prey. "This is one of the most calculated cases of family financial abuse I have seen," Sarah said after reviewing my documentation. "The power of attorney fraud alone is enough for criminal charges, but the systematic deception over multiple years elevates this to a felony level. We can pursue both civil recovery and criminal prosecution." She explained that the unusually broad power of attorney I had signed was legally questionable since I had been misled about its scope and duration. More importantly, using it to benefit other family members, rather than protecting my interests, was a clear violation of fiduciary duty. The fact that they had hidden the transactions from me while I was deployed overseas added federal complications, since it involved interference with military personnel's financial affairs. "How much of my money can we realistically recover?" I asked. "All of it, plus damages, plus legal fees," Sarah replied with a cold smile. "But more importantly, we can make sure they face serious legal consequences. Financial elder abuse laws work both ways, and adult children defrauding their parents are not the only ones protected. What your family did to you is grand theft, and we have the documentation to prove it." While Sarah began preparing the legal paperwork, I started phase 2 of my plan gathering allies and exposing the truth to other family members. I suspected that my parents had been lying to extended family about the situation, probably portraying themselves as generous helpers rather than thieves. My first call was to my cousin Marcus' Uncle Frank's oldest son, who had always been the straight shooter in the family. I invited him for coffee and laid out everything I had discovered, including his father's involvement in selling Brittany the house below market value. Marcus was quiet for a long time after I finished talking, then shook his head slowly. "Dakota, I had no idea. Dad told us that you had agreed to help Brittany with the house purchase as a graduation gift. He said you were excited to help your sister get established and that the whole family was proud of your generosity." The lies were even more extensive than I had realized. They had not just stolen my money, they had crafted an entire false narrative to make themselves look generous and me look willing. Everyone in the family believed I had voluntarily given Brittany nearly $200,000 and was happy about it. "There is more," Marcus continued, looking uncomfortable. "Dad has been telling everyone that you are planning to invest in some of his upcoming real estate deals when you get settled back home. He has been using your supposed willingness to invest as leverage to bring in other family money." My uncle was not just involved in the original theft. He was using my reputation and my stolen money to set up additional scams involving other family members. The conspiracy was bigger than I had imagined, and I was being used as the unknowing face of it. Marcus agreed to help me expose the truth, but he wanted to protect his father from criminal charges if possible. I understood his position, but I made it clear that I was not interested in protecting anyone who had participated in stealing from me. Family loyalty was a two-way street, and they had forfeited any claim to my consideration when they decided to rob me. My next ally came from an unexpected source. Brittany's ex-boyfriend Tyler reached out to me after hearing through mutual friends that I was back in town. We met at a bar downtown, and he was clearly nervous about something. "Look, I probably should not be telling you this," Tyler began after a couple of beers, "but Brittany has been bragging about how she scammed you out of your deployment money. She has been telling people that you were stupid to trust your parents and that she deserves the house more than you because you are never around anyway." The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. Not only had she stolen my money, but she was actively mocking me for being naive enough to trust our parents. She was treating my financial devastation as a personal victory and entertainment for her friends. She also said something about planning to ask for more money for house renovations, Tyler continued. "Apparently your parents told her that you have more savings they can access, and she wants to put in a pool and redo the kitchen." They were planning to steal from me again. This was not a one-time desperate decision. It was an ongoing scam where I was the permanent victim and Brittany was the perpetual beneficiary. They had already mentally spent money I had not even earned yet. Tyler also revealed that Brittany had been lying about her job situation. She was not working part-time retail. She had been unemployed for months and was living entirely off credit cards and family support. The house they had bought her was not a fresh start. It was an expensive burden she had no ability to maintain. Without continued family funding, she would be in foreclosure within a year. This information was crucial for my legal strategy. If Brittany could not afford the house payments, insurance, and maintenance, then the property would eventually become worthless anyway. But more importantly, it meant she was completely dependent on continued family support, which gave me significant leverage. My final ally was someone I had not expected to be on my side. Grandma Rose, my father's mother, who had always been the family matriarch and moral compass. I visited her at her assisted living facility and carefully explained the situation, showing her copies of the bank statements and legal documents. Grandma Rose was 92 years old, but her mind was still razor sharp, especially when it came to family finances. She had lived through the Depression and had strong opinions about money work and family responsibility. After reviewing my documentation, she was furious. "Those idiots," she muttered, shaking her head. "I raised your father better than this. Stealing from a child who served her country is the lowest thing I have ever heard. And to give it to Brittany, who has never worked an honest day in her life. This is exactly the kind of nonsense that destroys families." Grandma Rose had more influence over family dynamics than anyone realized. She controlled several family trusts, owned valuable property, and held the mortgage on my parents' house. More importantly, she was the one person in the family that everyone respected and feared disappointing. "What do you want me to do about this?" she asked. "I want justice," I replied. "I want my money back. I want them to face consequences for what they did, and I want the whole family to know the truth instead of the lies they have been spreading." Grandma Rose nodded slowly. "Consider it done. I am going to make some phone calls, and by the end of this week, everyone in this family is going to know exactly what kind of people your parents and that worthless sister of yours really are." As I left the assisted living facility, I felt the momentum shifting in my favor. I had legal representation, documented evidence, family allies, and inside information about their future plans. The network they had used to steal from me was about to become the network that would destroy them. They had spent months planning and executing their theft, thinking they were so much smarter than the simple soldier they were robbing. But they had made one critical error. They had underestimated exactly how thorough and ruthless I could be when someone betrayed my trust. The final phase was about to begin, and they still had no idea what was coming for them. 3 weeks later, everything started falling apart for them at once. I had orchestrated multiple simultaneous attacks on their fraud empire, timing everything to hit when they would be most vulnerable and least able to respond effectively. The first domino fell on a Tuesday morning when federal investigators showed up at my parents' house with a warrant. My lawyer Sarah had worked with the Military Financial Crimes Unit to file charges for interference with military personnel benefits, which carried much more serious penalties than simple theft. The investigators seized financial records, computers, and any documentation related to my savings account. Mom called me in hysterics, demanding that I call off the investigation and handle this privately within the family. Her voice was shaking as she tried to convince me that destroying the family over money was not worth it. The irony was incredible, coming from someone who had already destroyed the family by stealing from me, but she genuinely seemed to believe that my response was more damaging than her original crime. "Dakota, please," she begged through tears. "We can work this out. We can set up a payment plan to pay you back. You do not need to involve the police and ruin everything." "You should have thought about that before you stole my life savings," I replied calmly. "Actions have consequences, and you are about to learn what those consequences look like." The same day, Grandma Rose called a family meeting at her assisted living facility, inviting everyone, including aunts, uncles, and cousins. She had prepared a detailed presentation about the theft, complete with copies of bank statements and a timeline of lies my parents had told different family members. The room was dead silent as she methodically destroyed their credibility. Uncle Frank tried to defend the real estate transaction, claiming he had given Brittany a fair deal and that family members were entitled to help each other. Grandma Rose shut him down immediately, pointing out that using stolen money to buy property was money laundering regardless of family relationships. She announced that she was removing both my father and Frank from all family trusts and financial responsibilities effective immediately. "I am also calling in the mortgage on your house," she told my parents. "You have 30 days to pay the full balance or find alternative financing. I will not have thieves living in property that I own." The financial pressure was immediate and devastating. My parents had been counting on eventually inheriting Grandma Rose's estate, and they had structured their finances around that expectation. Now they were facing potential foreclosure on top of criminal charges, and their credit was about to be destroyed by the federal investigation. But the most satisfying moment came when Brittany finally realized the true scope of what was happening. She had been living in denial, convinced that somehow this would all blow over and she would get to keep her house. When the bank called to inform her that her mortgage was under federal investigation for potential fraud, reality hit her like a freight train. She showed up at my apartment unannounced, sobbing and desperate, begging me to stop the legal proceedings. Her makeup was smeared, her hands were shaking, and she looked like she had not slept in days. The confident, entitled princess, who had mocked me for being naive, was gone, replaced by someone who finally understood that actions have consequences. "I will give you back the house," she offered frantically. "You can have it, and we can pretend none of this ever happened. I just cannot go to jail, Dakota. I cannot handle jail." "You are not giving me back anything," I replied coldly. "That house was purchased with stolen money, which makes the entire transaction fraudulent. The court will decide what happens to it, not you." She tried appealing to family loyalty, promising she would make it up to me somehow, swearing she had not understood the full scope of what our parents had done. Every word was a lie, designed to save herself, just like the lies she had been telling for months about deserving my money more than I did. "Besides," I continued, "you told your friends that I was stupid for trusting our parents and that you deserved the house more than me. You made this personal, Brittany. You made it cruel. Now you get to live with the consequences." The investigation revealed even more crimes than I had suspected. The federal agents discovered that my parents had been systematically stealing from my account for over 2 years, not just the 18 months they had admitted to. They had been taking smaller amounts regularly and covering their tracks by transferring money between accounts to hide the theft. Uncle Frank had been more than just a willing participant. He had been the mastermind behind the entire scheme. The below-market sale to Brittany was just one part of a larger tax evasion and money laundering operation he had been running through his real estate business. My case had given federal investigators the opening they needed to examine his entire operation. The ripple effects extended throughout the extended family as other relatives realized they had been lied to and manipulated. Cousins who had been considering investing with Uncle Frank pulled their money. Family members who had believed the story about my generous gift to Brittany felt betrayed and used. The family reputation that my parents had been so concerned about protecting was completely destroyed. My cousin Marcus called to tell me that his father was facing potential federal charges for tax evasion and money laundering. "I'm sorry your family dragged you into our mess," I told him, "but I'm not sorry that the truth is finally coming out." The local newspaper picked up the story because military financial fraud was considered newsworthy, especially when it involved a veteran who had served multiple deployments. The headline read, "Local family accused of stealing life savings from deployed veteran. Everyone in town would know exactly what they had done and who they really were." Brittany's friends started avoiding her once the story became public. Her social media accounts, which had been filled with photos of her new house and lifestyle, were suddenly deactivated. The identity she had built around being the successful sister who deserved nice things crumbled when everyone realized those nice things had been purchased with stolen money. The house she had been so proud of became a liability she could not escape. The mortgage payments were beyond her means, the utilities were expensive, and the maintenance costs were mounting. She had gone from feeling like a winner to being trapped in a property that was slowly bankrupting her. My parents' marriage was falling apart under the pressure. Dad was blaming Mom for pushing the idea of helping Brittany, and Mom was blaming Dad for not understanding the legal implications of what they were doing. Their financial stress was compounded by their complete loss of family support and community standing. The empire they had built on lies and theft was collapsing exactly as I had planned. Every relationship they had damaged, every lie they had told every person they had manipulated was now working against them. The systematic destruction was beautiful in its completeness. They had thought they were so smart, so much more sophisticated than the simple soldier they were robbing. But they had never considered that the person they were stealing from might be smarter, more strategic, and infinitely more patient than they were. The war was almost over, and I had won completely. 6 weeks after the federal investigation began, the final pieces of their criminal empire crumbled in spectacular fashion. I watched from the sidelines as everything they had built on lies and theft fell apart exactly as I had planned. The criminal charges came down first. Mom and Dad were each facing 3 felony counts: grand theft, financial fraud against military personnel, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. The federal prosecutors were not interested in plea bargains because they wanted to send a message about protecting veterans' financial interests. Each charge carried a potential sentence of 2 to 5 years in federal prison. Uncle Frank was facing even more serious charges. The investigation into his real estate business had uncovered a massive tax evasion scheme involving multiple properties and fake transactions. My case had been the thread that unraveled his entire operation, and the federal agents were treating him as the ringleader of a criminal organization. His potential sentence was 15 to 20 years. Brittany was charged as an accessory to fraud since she had knowingly participated in using stolen money to purchase property. Her lawyer was trying to argue that she had been an unwitting victim of her parents' scheme, but the evidence of her bragging about scamming me made that defense impossible. She was looking at 2 years minimum. The civil case moved even faster than the criminal proceedings. Sarah had filed for immediate asset recovery, and the court had frozen all of their accounts pending resolution. The judge was particularly unsympathetic since the victims were a deployed veteran, and he fast-tracked our case through the system. The house that had started this whole mess became the centerpiece of our recovery strategy. Since it had been purchased entirely with stolen funds, the court ruled that Brittany had no legitimate claim to ownership. The property would be sold at auction, and all proceeds would go toward restitution for my losses, plus legal fees and damages. Brittany was forced to move out within 30 days. I drove by during her moving day and watched as she loaded her belongings into a rented truck, crying as she packed up the dream house that had never really belonged to her. The neighbors came out to watch the spectacle, whispering among themselves about the news stories they had read. Her social media accounts had been flooded with comments from people who had seen the newspaper coverage. Former friends were posting about how they had always suspected something was wrong with her sudden wealth. Co-workers from her retail job were sharing the articles with laughing emojis. The social reputation she had cared so much about was completely destroyed. Mom and Dad were forced to sell their house to pay for legal fees and prepare for restitution payments. Grandma Rose had called in their mortgage as promised, and no bank would refinance them with pending federal charges. They moved into a small apartment in the worst part of town, a dramatic fall from the comfortable middle-class lifestyle they had maintained by stealing from me. The family relationships they had damaged were irreparable. Cousins who had been considering investing with Uncle Frank lost substantial deposits when his business collapsed. Extended family members who had believed their lies about my generous gift felt betrayed and manipulated. The family gatherings that had been central to our social structure stopped happening entirely. Grandma Rose was particularly brutal in her judgment. She removed my parents from her will, completely redistributing their inheritance to other family members and veteran charities. "I will not reward thieves with family money," she announced at what would be the last family meeting. "They chose greed over family, and now they can live with the consequences." The community consequences were just as devastating as the family fallout. Dad lost his job when the federal charges became public, since his employer could not have someone with pending fraud charges handling financial responsibilities. Mom was forced to resign from her volunteer positions at church and local charities when other volunteers became uncomfortable working with someone accused of stealing from a veteran. Their credit was completely destroyed by the investigation and asset seizures. They could not get loans, credit cards, or even utility services without substantial deposits. The financial stability they had enjoyed by stealing from me was replaced by genuine poverty and limited options. Uncle Frank's real estate empire collapsed within months. His business assets were seized by federal investigators. His professional licenses were revoked, and his reputation in the local real estate market was permanently destroyed. The man who had been considered the family success story was facing bankruptcy and potential decades in prison. But the most satisfying consequence was watching Brittany struggle with the reality of supporting herself for the first time in her adult life. Without family money to fall back on, she was forced to work multiple part-time jobs to afford even basic necessities. The princess lifestyle she had grown accustomed to was replaced by the harsh reality of living paycheck to paycheck. She tried to find sympathy from mutual friends, portraying herself as a victim of our parents' poor decisions. But everyone knew she had been bragging about scamming me and mocking my naivety. Her attempts to play innocent fell flat when people remembered her social media posts celebrating her new house and lifestyle. The bank auction for the house was particularly satisfying. The property sold for $430,000, significantly more than Brittany had paid for it. After legal fees and court costs, I recovered my full $185,000 plus an additional $40,000 in damages and interest. During the auction, I watched potential buyers walk through the house that had been purchased with my stolen money. They had no idea about the drama and criminal activity that had surrounded the property, but I felt a deep satisfaction knowing that the proceeds were going directly back to where they belonged. The final collapse came when Uncle Frank accepted a plea bargain that required him to testify against my parents in exchange for a reduced sentence. The family loyalty that had been used as justification for stealing from me disappeared the moment prison time became real. He threw my parents under the bus to save himself, just like they had thrown me under the bus to help Brittany. The conspiracy that had taken them years to build and execute had been completely destroyed in less than 6 months. Every relationship was damaged, every reputation was ruined, every financial advantage was lost. They had thought they were so clever, but they had never considered that the person they were robbing might be smarter and more strategic than they were. The war was over, and the battlefield was littered with the wreckage of their lives. Everything they had built on lies and theft was gone, and they were facing years in federal prison with no family support and no financial resources. Justice had been served completely and thoroughly exactly as I had planned. Standing in the parking lot outside the federal courthouse 18 months later, I watched my parents and sister being led away in handcuffs after their sentencing hearing. Mom got 3 years, Dad got 4 years, and Brittany got 18 months. Uncle Frank had already been transferred to federal prison to begin his 12-year sentence. The judge had been clear that financial crimes against veterans would be punished to the full extent of the law. I felt no satisfaction in seeing them in chains, no joy in their tears or their pleas for mercy. The anger that had driven my quest for justice had been replaced by something calmer and more permanent. The knowledge that actions have consequences and people who betray trust must face the results of their choices. Sarah Martinez handed me the final restitution check as we walked back to her office. $267,000, representing my stolen savings plus damages, interest, and legal fees that the court had ordered them to pay. The money felt different now, heavier with meaning than just its numerical value. It represented vindication, justice, and the restoration of my ability to pursue my dreams. The veterinary clinic I had originally planned to open was still available, and the retired veterinarian had been following my story in the local news. When I contacted him about reviving our partnership discussion, he was eager to move forward. "I have been hoping you would call," he said. "What your family did to you was terrible, but the way you fought back showed me exactly the kind of character I want in a business partner." Within 6 months, I had opened Dakota's Second Chance Veterinary Clinic, specializing in therapy animals for veterans with PTSD and rescue animals who needed medical care. The name represented both the second chance I was giving abandoned animals and the second chance I had given myself after my family's betrayal. The business was thriving with a waiting list of veterans who wanted to participate in our animal therapy programs. My relationship with the extended family had been permanently changed, but not necessarily damaged. Cousins like Marcus, who had stood by me during the investigation, became closer friends than they had ever been when we were just related by blood. We had learned that shared values mattered more than shared genetics, and our relationships were stronger because they were based on choice rather than obligation. Grandma Rose had become my strongest family ally, treating me like the responsible grandchild she had always hoped for. She helped me with the business loan for the clinic and introduced me to other veteran entrepreneurs in her network. "Family is not about blood," she told me one afternoon over tea. "It is about people who show up for each other when it matters." The military community rallied around my story in ways I had never expected. Veterans organizations used my case as an example of financial scams targeting service members, and I was invited to speak at conferences about protecting military savings from family fraud. The advocacy work became a passion alongside my veterinary practice, helping other veterans recognize and respond to financial abuse. My dating life had improved dramatically once I learned to distinguish between people who valued me for who I was versus people who saw me as a resource to be exploited. The betrayal by my birth family had taught me to recognize red flags and trust my instincts about people's motivations. I was in a serious relationship with another veteran who understood both my military background and my complicated family history. The house that had started the whole conflict had been sold to a young couple with twin babies who were excited about the family neighborhood and excellent schools. I drove by occasionally and felt happy seeing children's toys in the yard and evidence of a loving family making genuine memories in the space that had once represented such ugliness and greed. Tyler, Brittany's ex-boyfriend, who had provided crucial information during my investigation, had become an unexpected friend. He later told me that helping expose the truth about her theft had been therapeutic for him since she had also stolen money from him during their relationship. We occasionally met for coffee and compared notes about recovering from relationships with manipulative people. The legal victory had given me something more valuable than money, the confidence that I could protect myself and fight back when necessary. The shy, trusting 19-year-old who had signed that power of attorney no longer existed. She had been replaced by someone who was kind but not naive, generous but not gullible, and absolutely unwilling to tolerate being taken advantage of by anyone. My parents and Brittany had tried to contact me from prison, sending letters full of apologies and requests for forgiveness. I read each letter carefully and then threw them away without responding. Forgiveness was not something I owed them, and their apologies were meaningless without genuine accountability for the systematic way they had betrayed my trust. The clinic had grown beyond my original vision, employing 6 full-time staff members and serving over 200 veteran families in our therapy programs. We had expanded to include a rescue program for dogs who had been abandoned or abused, creating a perfect match between veterans who needed healing companionship and animals who needed second chances at loving homes. Local news stations had followed up on my story, featuring the clinic's success as an example of justice leading to positive community impact. The coverage brought in donations, volunteers, and new clients who wanted to support a business that had been built on principles of integrity and service. What had started as personal revenge had evolved into something that served the broader community. As I locked up the clinic one evening and headed home to my apartment, I reflected on how completely my life had changed. 2 years earlier, I had been a broke veteran whose family had stolen her life savings and destroyed her dreams. Now, I was a successful business owner, community advocate, an example of how fighting for justice could lead to something better than what had been stolen. The family I had been born into had taught me painful lessons about greed, betrayal, and the difference between blood relations and genuine love. But the chosen family I had built around me, including business partners, fellow veterans, loyal friends, and supportive extended relatives, had taught me that real family shows up when you need them most. My story had become something bigger than just personal revenge. It was proof that people who betray trust face consequences, that fighting for justice is worth the effort, and that sometimes losing everything you thought was important makes room for something much better. To everyone who watched this crazy family drama unfold, I have a question for you. Have you ever experienced a situation where family betrayal forced you to choose between keeping the peace and fighting for justice? What would you have done in my situation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because I love hearing your perspectives on family loyalty versus personal integrity. If this story of family karma and justice served inspired you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about standing up for yourself when people try to take advantage of your kindness. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that fighting back against family manipulation is not only acceptable, but sometimes absolutely necessary. Thank you for watching my journey from victim to victor, and remember that sometimes the family that matters most is the one you choose for yourself, not the one you were born into. Until next time, keep fighting for what is right, And never let anyone steal your dreams, no matter how much they claim to love you.